Hello, NILC managers. This is Christine coming to you live from my home office. And for May, we're going to do things a little bit differently, and I'll be interested in your feedback on this. Instead of a 90-minute Zoom workshop to cover the content and deepen the learning, I thought I would record this video of the basic content, have you take a look at it before we meet on the 14th or the 20th, whichever date you choose, to discuss resolving conflict. I take a look at this first, and then we'll use the 1 hour meeting time to answer your questions and do some live examples and deepen your learning that way. So let us begin. Conflict is one of my favorite subjects because difficult conversations are often seen as going to be really hard, or people think it will be bloody, or they do lots of things to try to avoid making it difficult, and then sometimes end up making it more difficult than it needs to be. So this content will help you with frameworks and things to think about before you go to address a difficult situation, which could look like these kinds of things. So conflicts happen all over the place in all areas of life. At work, you see some examples of how it can show up. Mainly, the thing to think about is when two people are in conflict, it generally comes from a difference. Often, though, we see it as one of us is right and the other is wrong. Now, if we do the right-wrong thing, then somebody has to try to convince the other about who's right. And then we get stuck in positions. And that's a dead end. So if we can first start by looking at any of these conflict situations as, wow, we have a difference in any one of these things. We each have a viewpoint. Let's start there and see what they are and see if we can figure out a goal that is mutually acceptable and beneficial, and then go from there. So I want to give you this framework that's been really helpful for me and the people that I've been working with for over 20 years in getting themselves organized before they open their mouths. So here's the thing. If a situation comes up, somebody says something that just gripes you, or they send an email, or any number of situations that might cause your heart rate to go up, that makes you think about it. If you're spinning around and you can't let it go, then you want to use this framework and go have a conversation. If you say, that was something that I can live with that. It's not that big of a thing. It only happened once. I'm just going to let it go. Well, then do that. If it comes back and it starts bugging you, waking you up in the middle of the night, can't stop thinking about it, it's time to go address it. So I love this 5-step framework, and I'll cover each step as we go along here. Let's start with the first one. I see way too many people trying to address situations, whether it be, as you saw on the previous list, a negative feedback situation, there's a performance issue, big or small, or somebody said something that made somebody else mad, feelings got hurt, whatever it is, they will try to address it by sending an email. And leaders, I've seen this so many times, employees complain about this. My boss fires off an email and criticizes me and then tells me what to do. There's no dialogue there. It's really not a good strategy, other than if you want instant documentation. So I don't recommend that. So I see all kinds of crazy things: waiting until the review, sending emails, leaving a voicemail, dropping a hint, making a passive-aggressive comment, making a joke. That old saying, many a truth is said in jest. That saying is there for a reason. So best, if you have a conflict situation that you'd like to work out, is to go face-to-face if you can. And I know right now the world is not making that very conducive to conversation, but you can also do video chat or even telephone. One of the most difficult conflict situations I ever worked out personally happened over the telephone. It was a little harder because it didn't have the nonverbal cues, but in a way it can be easier because people aren't don't have to look at each other. So that can create some safety. So make the decision that you're willing to talk directly with the person, not through some other channel of communication. That's the first step. Before you start moving your lips, you're going to want to get your emotions under control. One of the most important things a leader can do is to learn to control this. Things happen that make us angry or disappointed. But if I lead with that emotion, even if I try not to, it's still going to leak out. That's going to be an obstacle in the dialogue. The objective of having any conversation to resolve a conflict is just that, resolution. So I am shooting for some kind of a positive outcome. So the best way to start off, besides being willing to go person to person, is for me to control myself. So sometimes you might have to wait until you're calmed down. But two strategies that I have found and my clients have found very useful are the two that you see here. They may sound simple. You may be asking, what is this finding my feet business? We tend to be hot-headed with cold feet. Not a good conversation, not a good combination to resolve issues. So I want to bring the heat that might be up here down to the feet by connecting them to the ground. When I'm doing any kind of public speaking or running a workshop, I ask myself regularly throughout the time that I'm on my feet, do I know where my feet are? Am I totally in my head, or can I feel my feet connected to the ground? If you practice any kind of grounding strategies just in regular life, this is along those same lines. Now, if I'm sitting, which probably I would be if I'm going to sit down and have a meeting with someone or be on video chat, I want to do two things regarding the feet. I want my feet on the floor, and I want my back against the back of the chair. I want to be in as relaxed and grounded in that position that I can be, rather than all hunched over and tensed up. I used to think that tensing up was a natural and helpful strategy for dealing with problems, and that relaxing meant that somehow I was minimizing it or not taking action. But really, relaxing is the key here. Also, when people can see you, if you are relaxed and breathing, they are more likely to also relax and start breathing. So there's the second strategy, breathe. Now here's the thing about breathing. When a conflict situation comes up, the brain goes on high alert. Just because you're not being chased by a tiger doesn't mean that your limbic brain, your ancient brain, your lizard brain, call it what you will, it's down here at the base, that doesn't mean that that can discern. It cannot discern between a personality conflict or being chased down by a wild animal. So it's going to react in the same way as though there is big danger here. And then it releases adrenaline. And when that happens, the blood rushes out of the core of your body into your extremities. It also leaves your head. You don't get enough oxygen because your breathing becomes more shallow. So sometimes people will even hold their breath. And then at the same time, your heart rate has jumped up. I know you know what I'm talking about. So now look at the situation. I'm flooded with adrenaline. My arms and legs are ready to fight or flee, and I'm not getting enough oxygen to the brain because I'm not breathing properly. So now it's harder for me to think. It's harder for me to listen to the other person. And if I don't breathe for long enough, eventually I'm going to die. So taking a deep breath in, do it with me now. Just take a moment to take a deep breath in and hold it at the top just for a sec. And then release it slowly. Count of 4 if you want to be specific. Let's do it again. Now, you don't have to answer this question to anyone but yourself. But did you just take 2 deep breaths with me? Or did you skip over that and say, I don't have time for this? Or something along those lines. It's really helpful once in a while to stop and take a couple of deep breaths and calm your system before you go on. All right, so there you go. You've made the decision that you're going to go talk to a person where there's some kind of a beef going on. Could be related to a project or a goal or personality differences or something. You've decided it's important enough to have a conversation and try to get it resolved. So that's an important first decision. Then you get yourself under control so that you can come across the way that you want to, and without the harmful emotional displays that sometimes people use to try to make their point. So here comes the third one. Now this is a biggie, and it should look familiar to you because this is in essence the feedback tool. Same framework. Now in an emotionally charged situation, it can be more difficult to apply this tool, but I encourage you to give it a try. What is the real topic I'd like to talk about? Is it our communication? Is it our working relationship? Is it the way we communicate over email? What is it really? And you want to be able to say that in one sentence. I'd like to talk with you about our working relationship. That's a period. And then you want to be able to describe objectively what you've seen, not what you think about it. So this is where the observations come into play. I'd like to talk with you about our communication, period. What I've noticed is when I ask you a question, you almost always say, I don't have time for that. When you have a good question, let me know, period. So in that case, I was quoting the person. So you want to be as objective and concrete as possible without putting all the interpretations in that explain or judge. For example, a way not to do it would be to say, well, obviously you think that it's not very important to maintain good relationships. There's so much wrong with that sentence. Obviously could just be a trigger for defensiveness. You think, oh, now hold on a second. Have I just acquired mind reading capabilities? I don't know what somebody else is thinking. So that's my interpretation of what's happening. So obviously you think that it's not important. It's just laden with judgments and assumptions. So this is a good skill for you guys to work on. What are you actually seeing? Then, if there's no impact from what's happening, why are you even bringing it up? So you'll want to be able to say with clarity and substance and brevity what the impact is. Now, sometimes managers will default to, and this is unacceptable. That's not really very helpful. But if I can say, I'd like to talk with you about our communication. What I notice is when I ask you a question, blah, blah, blah. The impact is, or the effect that it has on me is that I'm not able to get the information I need from you. And also, whatever's true for you. What is true for you in that case? So I want to be able to say why this is important enough to talk about. A long time ago, when I was just a kid, I had a job in a department store. And one of the other people who worked there used to go up and down the stairs that was in front of my department, whistling. Okay, here's the thing about me. I just don't really like whistling. And he did it a lot. And it was really bugging me. I thought at the time, I remember thinking, I should really talk to him about that. Well, I'm glad I didn't, because what it would have sounded like is, I'd like to talk with you about your whistling. It bugs me. Okay. Now, if there was an actual business impact, it was annoying to the customers or people didn't want to come there because he was doing that, then that would have been something for the boss to talk about. But for me to just go over and say, because you shouldn't do that because I don't like it, isn't going to get you anywhere. So get these 3 sentences together. What I want to talk about, what I've seen, the effect that it's having on the situation or on me. and then be prepared to invite the person to talk about it. When you're giving feedback, negative feedback to an employee, you would still use these 3 sentences, and then you would say something like, let's talk about it. There's your invitation. In a conflict situation, say with a peer, a good strategy is to say your 3 sentences and then say, would you be willing to talk about it? So you see the distinction there. There are different ways to invite the person to speak. All right, so prepare your sentences before you go live with the person. Now you're at the point where, let's say you're in front of the person or you're on video chat, you've gotten yourself under control. You've said, I'd like to talk with you about this. Here's what I saw. Here's the impact. Would you be willing to talk about it? The other person says, okay. Well, now you've done your talking, so it's time for you to stop talking. And the other person may have a reaction or an immediate response, may start talking, or you, if they don't, you say, oh, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? Then you may say, what's your viewpoint on this? Or how are you seeing this? To invite them to start talking. Now, when they're talking, because people have different communication styles, actually the difference in communication styles might have even been the root of the conflict that you're wanting to talk about now. Whatever it is, you may have to work at pushing through the detail and perhaps the communication style that doesn't quite work for you in your quest to understand their main point. This is also a key skill for a leader, is to be a good listener. Now, what do most people do instead of listening? They're thinking about what they want to say when the other person stops talking. They're thinking about their rebuttals. They're thinking about their grocery list. Or they're reacting defensively and interrupting the person who's speaking. So whatever your tendencies are with listening, if it's not true active listening, this is something that you'll want to work on, to not so much agree or disagree with what the person is saying, but to listen for understanding of their main point. Now, let's say the person says, here's my whole story. Here's how I feel about your message. Here's my reaction to your message. Here's all my explanations and defensiveness, whatever it is. Maybe it's 14 paragraphs verbally. You're listening for the main point, and then you might say, so it sounds like from your view, whatever it is that right? So it sounds like from your point of view, I come across like I'm questioning you rather than asking questions. Is that right? Now, you're not agreeing with them or disagreeing. You're just saying, this is what I think I'm hearing from you. Or if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you're so busy. Well, even that could come across judgmental. But anyway, it sounds like you're so busy that when I ask you questions, it's slowing you down. Am I getting you right? You're just making a sincere attempt to verbally show that you're trying to understand their point the way they wanted to make their point. Now, after you check understanding in this way, you want to zip it and wait, because they're either going to say, well, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening. Or no, you misunderstood me completely. The beauty of that is, even if you misunderstood or you put words in their mouth or whatever, at least you guys are in dialogue. Doesn't have to take an hour, by the way. So they're saying, no, you misunderstood me. Now I can say, well, I'm so glad I checked because I want to understand you. Mutual understanding is the key to resolving differences. Not mutual agreement. I'm not trying to convince them of my point of view. I've got my point of view out. Now they're getting their point of view out, and we're just trying to understand each other. When I work as a mediator, and at the end of this, I'll share briefly how that works. When I work as a mediator, when I get the two people who are in conflict into the conference to resolve it, I usually allow 2 hours. And I will tell you that consistently, 90 minutes of that time is spent trying to get those two people to listen to each other until they reach some kind of understanding. Then once that happens, the problem solving is easy. All right, let's keep moving. So with that, if you're able to get your point of view out, they get their point of view out, and you're able to see, gee, we're actually pretty close together, or we're continents apart in how we're seeing this situation. But once you have understanding and at least one person says, okay, I see your point, or I get it, then you go on to trying to make an agreement. So whatever the situation is, working relationship, differences in the direction of a project, whatever it is, you want to have some kind of a goal together. So you might propose it, or you might ask them, well, what does good look like for you in our working relationship? Once you can agree on a goal, then you can brainstorm ideas back and forth. On the first round of brainstorming, all ideas are welcome. So you want to go fast, and you're not stopping to evaluate. Oh no, that'll never work. Yeah, bite your tongue before you say that. You get all of the ideas out, and whatever media you can is going to work best in your situation. And then together you figure out the best steps and make them crisp. They're steps. They're not aspirations or thoughts. We'll think about that as we go. No. Something better would be, we'll meet every week on Thursday at 10 for a 15-minute check-in. Or it depends on the situation. Your steps have to take you, have a reasonable chance of helping you achieve the goal that you agreed on. But make them clear and specific with dates and times as much as you can. And then as you see here, you want this documented, not to go to some HR file, but documented agreement between the two of you, because this becomes your working agreement. And then you set a date to check in. That's how to resolve conflict. It's a framework. I recommend sticking with it until you feel more confident. If this is an area where perhaps you tend to avoid conflict, or maybe you've been a hinter. Sometimes people will say things like, well, the obviously you think, that's a problematic statement. Or I see managers doing this often. Next time, it would be really great if you could do X, Y, and Z. Well, that is neither feedback nor describing a conflict. It is a request to do something different without the context of why. So the idea here is to be honest and direct and constructive when you see a problem and you want to solve it, and being willing to work with the other person, even if they have a reaction that makes you feel uncomfortable. Unless it's something egregious and you're afraid for your safety, this is just people beefs, and you can work them out. So let's just take a moment here to talk about facilitating resolution. Here's the overview. In my experience, if you teach people and you mentor them and you show them the way, often they're able to just work out their minor disagreements. But sometimes people don't do that well, and it grows and grows, and then it's too late for them to try to work it out themselves, and they need the support of a facilitator or a mediator. So my training came from the Conflict Resolution Center of Santa Cruz, California, and they teach court mediators, so family and community issues, divorces, that sort of thing. The principles are all the same. The two parties have to agree that they'll be willing to do the work together. If all it takes is one person to say, no, thanks, I don't want to do that, and you can't do facilitated resolution. Because what they're saying is, we know we've got a beef, we know we've got a problem, and we want to make an attempt at least to try to work it out between ourselves. We need some support. So you're going to get them set up if they agree to this, and are prepared. And once they're prepared, then there's a meeting. And your role as the facilitator is to create some safety so that the people can do the work. Now, this is different than arbitration. I'm sure this is a group of experts in the legal field, but so often in the workplace, people misunderstand mediation versus arbitration. So you're not there to tell people what to do, even if you're the boss. So first, you'll want to meet with people privately. This is a nice, safe space. They don't have to be, they don't have to choose their words carefully to avoid hurting somebody's feelings, because they're just there with you. I love to do this kind of work because it's a relief for people to be able to get it out without mincing words. So, out it comes. Now, if I've got all these verbal paragraphs of upset, I'm going to help the person figure out, how do I say this message in the best way possible in 1 or 2 sentences? Here's my key complaint, or here's the couple, 3 sentences that most describes why I'm having an issue that I want to work out with you. So I'm going to coach the person along the way. What's the beef? The goal for the working relationship or the situation, the steps that they're willing to take, and the steps they'd like the other person to take. I'm going to have them write all of that down. Then, now both people know we're going to go into a meeting at some point here and talk about it. So once we get into the meeting, as the facilitator, my role is not to tell people what to do or to tell them the steps they should take or any of that stuff. My role is to run the process of facilitating this meeting, getting people to listen to each other, and running interference if they have a hard time staying constructive. So that's where you can set your ground rules right up front. So I always tell people, I'm the facilitator, which means I may stop you and start you. So I need your permission to facilitate. So I always ask for their permission. All it takes is one person to say, no, I don't want to do this, or no, you can't facilitate, and the whole thing is off. There's another way to deal with that. As one person I worked with had 2 managers working for him, different functions, but they had to collaborate. And one at a time, they came in and told him they refused to work with the other person. Something happened, somebody's feelings got hurt, and they refused to work with one another. So he called me to see if he could legally separate them. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to help you do that, but I'll help you facilitate resolution if you want to. And so he went back and asked each of them, would you be willing to do facilitated conflict resolution? And one of them said yes, the other said no. And he didn't know what to do. So I sent him back in to tell the no person, that's fine, you don't have to do mediation. And I still expect you and everybody else who works for me to work respectfully and productively with other people. So you don't have to do resolution, but we'll have to sit down and figure out a plan for you to work well with this other person. So what she decided was, okay, I'll go ahead and do the mediation. That sounds better to me. So he worked it out that way. Just because people say no, they don't want to mediate, doesn't mean that they can behave any way they want at work and refuse to work with one another. Unless there's some egregious legal issue going on, talk to HR if you suspect that. Otherwise, it's usually just people saying something that makes the other person mad or embarrassed, or people start taking sides. It can get messy quickly, these interpersonal issues. All right, so I'm setting ground rules. I'm going to facilitate. The idea is to resolve this, not argue about it. So my expectation is everyone would stay constructive as possible and to listen and to work with positive intent toward a mutually acceptable resolution. So you get to pick your own ground rules. I like to flip a coin. That first person starts talking, and I spend a lot of the rest of the time getting them to listen to each other. So when the first person speaks, I'm watching the other person too to see if there are any nonverbal reactions, eye rolling or anything, or looking down at the table. And then I might ask the other person, it looks like you're having a reaction. Can you tell us? Or I'll at least say, can you summarize what the first person means? So that is key right there. Can you summarize in your own words what this person is saying? Most of the time people can't do it. So you have to have some patience here to help people listen to each other. You're not looking for an answer to what the person said. You're not looking for a defense. It's like, can you summarize in your own words? So after we've gone back and forth a few times, each person having a chance to speak and then demonstrate listening, almost always they'll get the hang of it and they really start listening to each other. And once they do that, 99% of the time, one of them is going to say, oh, holy cow, I had no idea that it was like that for you. When that happens, you know you've been successful as a facilitator because they're really listening to each other now. And the rest is pretty easy. So they've come prepared with their goals, or their goal for the working relationship or the situation, the steps they are willing to take and the steps they want the other person to take. So you get the goals written somewhere where both people can see it, and then they agree on one common goal. And they're usually pretty close. And you would know because you helped them prepare. And then they start the brainstorming, and then you clean up the plan and you set a follow-up date. So in essence, that's how you'd facilitate if you were going to step in and support people in your group to resolve a situation that they can't resolve for themselves. I'm happy to talk with you about this, and we can talk about it in the meeting. So let's talk about the next steps here. The May workshops will take place on these 2 dates. We'll send an invitation with this video here. Please watch the video and be prepared to, for whichever live workshop you come to with your questions and some examples. You don't have to reveal anybody's names or a situation that's so specific it violates confidentiality, but bring a topic that we could actually work on so that you have a live example of the framework in action. Or if you're willing to share with us an actual situation, then we can get you prepared to go resolve it. And there we have it. We'll see how this works. And I'll look forward to your feedback, and I will look forward to seeing you soon.